Hi guys, today we're going to be doing Practice It Java Edition 5 Exercise 4.7 XO. Okay, so the question is, write a static method named XO that accepts an integer size as a parameter and prints a square of size by size characters, where all characters are O, except that an X pattern of X characters has been drawn from the corners of the square. In other words, on the first line, the first and last characters are X. On the second line, the second and second from last characters are X, and so on. If 0 or less is passed for the size, no output should be produced. Okay, so let's first just create the function XO, and we're going to be accepting a parameter int size. Okay, so within this method, the very first condition that we have to consider is if 0 or less is passed, because the question doesn't say it won't happen. So I'm just going to do if size is greater than or equal to 0, then what I'm going to do is the whole entire process of making this x with x's. So I'm just going to go and explain to you by picture really quick. Okay, so let's try and visualize what we are trying to do. So let's say size is 3. Okay, then that means we have to have 3 rows, right? And what happens is there's 3 places, 3 place markers, right? And then the x, to make an x, we need it here, here, and here, right? So, and then all of these are 0, O's. What this looks like to me individually, I think it would be nice as an array, maybe, because arrays have indexes. So in the case that let's make an array, right? And let's fill it up with all O's in the beginning, right? And then we can find some way to incrementally change these to x's, and then change the middle one to an x, and then change it back to these two. So I'm thinking, if we have a for loop and set I is equal to 0, right, and we stop at I is less than size, and we increment I by 1, then what we can do is, with this array that we have, we repeat 3 O's a bunch of times, or 3 times, right? And so we should modify each row before printing the row. So that means for this first row, what needs to change is the first and the last index, right? Which means index 0 and index size minus 1, right? Because if size is 3, this is going to be at index 2. So then we can do it this way. Have another variable called int j equal to size minus 1 minus I. Because if you think about it, I is 0 in the very beginning, right? And then let's just consider the first iteration first. We get line of I, which is 0 right now, right? And set that equal to x. And then line of j, set that equal to x also. Because j right now, as of this moment, is size minus 1 minus I, which is equal to 0, right? And so what we've got now is this, x0, x, right? And so let's print this first, right? Just use a for loop. Let's just say we printed it. And then move on to the next line, right? Because we want to print onto the next line. And then let's revert everything back to normal. Because in the next row, we need 0x0, right? And it would be a hassle to turn these from x's to zeros back again and before we do anything. So let's do that at the end after we've printed the XOX, and we can afford to just turn everything back into OOO, right? So we just need to do line I is equal to O, line J is equal to O also. Okay, and so if we go back and go through the second iteration, this time I is equal to 1, right? So that means J is going to be equal to size minus 1, which is 3 minus 1, minus I, which is 1. So that means it's going to be equal to 1, right? So that means line of I 1, right, which is I, is going to be X. Line of J, which is also 1, is going to be X. So then if you look at this array that we made, which is currently 0, 0, 0, which is 0, 1, 2, that means this middle one is going to turn into X. So that means we get 0, X, 0 right after we printed this X, 0, X, right? And then once we do that, we have to print it, right? And then turn it back to zeros, not zeros, O's, my bad. So that it's all O, O, O again. And then let's try doing the next iteration. This time I is going to be equal to 2, right? Because 2 is still less than 3. And that means J is going to be equal to 3 minus 1, which is 2 minus 2. So J is equal to 0 now, right? And then line I is equal to 2, is going to be X. Line J is equal to 0 is going to be X also, right? So essentially, in the very first iteration, I was what made the first X, right? And then J was what made this second X, right? But in this second iteration, third iteration, their positions have flopped. We still get XOX, but it's I that makes this X, and it's J that makes this X. Yeah, and then we just print that and then turn everything back to OOO. And that means in the end, we've got XOX, OXO, and then XOX again. Okay, so let's try and code this. Okay, so as I explained in the drawing, I hope it made sense. In the drawing, what I did was to set the value for int j, which was what decided, the x value for the outermost x, right? This one, oops, the x here, the x on this side, the rightmost x, should I say. The variable that decided the position for that was int j, right? And if you remember, I drew it like int j and then size minus 1, right, minus I, right? And in the code, I'm just going to shorten it and just create a variable that I can use later. So int num is just going to be the deciding number for the index for j. Okay, so in the description, the drawing, what I had was a line array, right? So I'm just going to create a line array that equal to new string. Okay, and this is just going to be that single lined array that's going to be the baseline template for one of the rows. So I create the array and now I have to fill it up with O's. To do that, I'm just going to do int I equals 0, y is less than size, I plus plus. Okay, so in the for loop, I'm just going to set line I equal to O. Okay, so now we've come to that step in the drawing that I showed you where line is equal to O. Like this, right? And so now we're going to go through the process of how we're going to change these O's into X's. Okay, so like I described in the drawing, what's going to happen is first let's do a for loop, right? And we're going to do it up until size, amount of times. And how we're going to do it is, right, here comes our variable j, where it's going to be equal num minus I, right? Because num, as I said, we created that variable up here, which is just size minus 1, and it's going to be minus I so that it can sort of simulate that sort of on the right side where it goes in one at a time, one more index in at a time. So it's x at the final index, and then second to last, and then third to last. And so we're just going to be simulating that with this, right? Because I increases by 1 every single time, and so it's going to be decreasing by 1, which is what we need to get that sort of in by 1, second to last, third to last aspect of the x. Okay, so then now for the big part, let's just get the index of I and set that equal to x, right? And in this case, I is 0 first, right? So what it does is just, we've drawn this x right here. And now to draw the x on the opposite side, and to do that, we just go with j, right? And set that equal to x. Because j is, once again, it's going to be size minus 1 minus 0. Okay. And then now we have to print the whole line. Print the whole array, should I say. So I'm just going to use an advanced for loop. So for everything in line, I'm going to put it inside a string, and then I'm going to print it. Okay, so now that I printed it, like in the drawing, we have to revert it back to its original so that we can change it for the next row. So I'm just going to do, remember, before we do that, we should probably move on to the next line, right? We don't want a big row extending to the right. We want it compact in sort of like a square rectangle shape. Okay, so now that we moved on to the next line, I'm just going to revert it back to its original. And it's going to be equal to O again. Line J is going to be equal to O as well. And then we're good to go. Oops, forgot the period.